Hey everyone, welcome to Jason Explains Things. So I've got some much needed free time today. So what do you say we do a tune-up on my 1974 Volkswagen Super Beetle. It's got the 1600cc air-cooled Volkswagen engine that a lot of cars have. Pretty much any air-cooled engine that you have, you can watch this video. It'll kind of give you the basics of how to do a tune-up. We're gonna be doing an oil change, valve adjustment, spark plugs, and also I'm gonna do something that you guys have been telling me to do for literally years. We're gonna move the fuel filter out of the engine bay to a much safer place to avoid any fires. So let's look at some supplies. Supplies and a couple specialty tools. So first off, 3 quarts of oil. I like 20W50 conventional oil with high zinc content. When it comes to what oil you use, do your own research. I'm gonna link to a great article and some of my past videos on this topic. You're gonna tell me I'm wrong, that's fine. And if you don't wanna do research about oil, you can just check the original shop manual. It looks like they say for pretty much all non-tropic and non-subarctic climates, you want SAE 30. Spark plugs, we have BOSCH WR8ACs. Of course, you've got your basic oil change kit with the gaskets and the new copper washers. We also, in case we need these, we have some new cork gaskets for the valve covers. Then also, you don't need this per se to do the valve adjustment. You can get this specialty tool, but you can also just use a screwdriver and wrench. But if you have that, it makes it a little bit easier. Then also, of course, you need a feeler gauge. And last but not least, I probably need to retire this thing soon, but it's always good to check your work with shop manual, and this one has been very, very used.
Starting with the oil change, I blocked the front wheels and lifted the rear of the bug, securing it on jack stands. Remove the center drain bolt and allow the oil to drain. Next, remove the small 10mm nuts that hold the strainer plate and cover.
Volkswagens do not have an oil filter of any kind. They just have this strainer, which is kind of crazy by today's standards, but hey, you know, it worked.
Okay, we got our strainer plate and our strainer nice and clean. To get this clean, I just used some gasoline and some compressed air in a rag and just made sure it's nice and spotless.
Make sure the engine block is clean and has no residue before moving on. Install the first gasket, then the strainer, then the second gasket, and then the plate. Using the new copper washers, tighten down the 10mm bolts in a star pattern. The engine studs break easily. Do not over-tighten the nuts. The book only calls for 5 foot-pounds. Install the drain bolt with a new copper washer and torque to 30 foot-pounds.
All right, that's looking good for now. I'm gonna add 2 quarts of oil, check for leaks, and then we're gonna move on to other things. By the way, I'm not going to fill the engine with oil and check everything with the dipstick until later when the vehicle is level on the ground. Well, I ran out of free time, so it's a new day back on the bug. Last thing we did last night is I pulled all the spark plugs. Take a look at those. There's a story to tell. So here are our spark plugs in order of the cylinder. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 3 especially, but also 4 were quite wet with fuel. This denotes that either I'm running too rich or maybe we're having a spark issue on these cylinders. So we'll definitely be taking a close look at that. Now, if it is running too rich, which it almost definitely is, it kind of smells like it's running rich as well. I'm probably gonna need to swap out the jets. I do not have any replacement ones in the shop, so that'll have to be down the road someday. But in the meantime, we'll definitely make sure everything is firing correctly. We're gonna swap out all of those spark plugs, and we're gonna make sure our valves are nicely in spec.
New spark plugs are very easy to install. First, remember to check and set the proper gap. The manual calls for a gap of 0.06 millimeters or 0.024 inches. These spark plug gap gauges work great. Apply a small amount of copper anti-seize to the spark plug threads. The new plugs are ready to be installed, but I'm gonna move on now to the valve adjustment. It's easier to do without the plugs because the engine won't have compression and the flywheel can be turned by hand.
Having all your valves properly adjusted is very important to having your engine run properly, to have proper power and fuel efficiency. All right, looking at our engine, we can see kind of the order that we're gonna go in. So we're gonna start with adjusting the valves for cylinder 1, which is in that corner, then cylinder 2, then cylinder 3, then cylinder 4. To start with cylinder 1, which is where we're starting, you want to make sure your engine is at top dead center. We want to line the top dead center mark up with the split in the case, just like you see there. Now, top dead center can actually be the correct place to adjust cylinder 1 or cylinder 3. Now, to make sure that you are adjusting the correct one, you want to start by removing your distributor cap, and you can look at the rotor, and the rotor will be pointing at distributor 1. As you can see, pointing that direction. So we are ready to adjust our first set of valves. Okay, so take your 0.15 millimeter feeler gauge and you want to stick it right here in between your rocker arm and the valve cap. So what you're looking for when you do this is you want to have some resistance, but obviously if it's too tight, then you won't even be able to get it in there. So that's pretty darn good. You know, there's a little bit of drag, but not very much. Let's check the other one. Now that one's actually even better, in my opinion. This is something that you definitely kind of learn over time by feel. And this one feels like it could be a tiny bit loose. So actually, let's tighten this one up. But what I like to do is leave my feeler gauge in place like that. We're gonna take our valve adjusting tool and crack this lock nut loose. Just turning it counterclockwise. This is either a 13 millimeter wrench or you can use this special tool. So, okay, so that's a little bit loose right there. Now I can use the screwdriver, there we go, to tighten this up a little bit. Let's see how that feels. Now that's way too tight. Okay, so we overdid it. There. That feels good. That feels good. So then, holding our adjusting screw as securely as we can, we now tighten this up. Things can get a little bit wonky when you do this. Yeah, that feels good. That feels really good. I'm gonna use my fancy tool one more time, just because. There we go. Excellent, okay. Let's readjust the engine and then we're gonna do this cylinder. So adjusting cylinder 2, you want to grab your pulley here and rotate the engine counterclockwise until we are at bottom dead center. So there you go, that's pretty much all you have to do. You adjust the valves just like I showed you last time, making sure they both have a little bit of drag with your feeler gauge. Make sure it's nice and tight before you move on, then rotate the engine again another 90 degrees until now we're at top dead center to do cylinder 3, and then bottom dead center to do cylinder 4, and then you're done.
Thread the spark plugs in by hand and then torque to spec. The manual calls for 25 foot-pounds. Do not over-tighten them. Pro tip, if you want to quickly check if a spark plug is firing before doing this job, simply pull the plug wires off the distributor one at a time. If the engine runs rougher when you pull one off, then it's good. If there's no change, then there's an issue with that spark plug or wire.
We're running on all 4. Woohoo! All right, we got the spark plugs taken care of. It is a good idea to check your timing after adjusting your valves, but I'm gonna skip that for now, see how it idles. I need to check some of my notes because the timing marks are a little different with the Weber than they are with the stock carburetor in the book. So I'm gonna move on to relocating the fuel filter. Let me show you a couple things going on that aren't stock here in my engine bay, so this makes sense. Now, right here you have your mechanical fuel pump, which goes to the fuel filter, which we're gonna get rid of. And because of my aftermarket carburetor, I have a fuel pressure regulator, and that is this guy right here. So that's why we have this kind of elaborate system of tubes going on. So what we're gonna do is make it look just like it is now, but we're just gonna do a new piece of hose so we don't have any leaks. And then we're gonna actually add a fuel filter behind the engine compartment underneath the car.
I removed the line from the fuel pump to the pressure regulator, being careful to drain gas into a container. By the way, I might joke around, but I do appreciate you guys commenting on this and voicing your concern. This car is a priceless family heirloom at this point, so it burning to the ground would be tragic.
I changed my shirt because gas. I learned a few things. So most of the fuel lines in the engine bay are 1/4 inch, but actually, at least on my Super Beetle, the fuel line coming from the gas tank, the short rubber line coming from the metal line from the gas tank was actually 3/16. So I had the wrong fuel line, I had the wrong fuel filter, but a trip to to Napa and a change of shirt and everything's fine, it's fine. So there's the new fuel line with the new filter, with new clamps. Everything is nice and tight and not leaking gas anymore. Hooray for that. So yeah, there you go.
With the car level, I topped off the engine oil till it read full on the dipstick.
I ruined this lens. I dropped it on the ground. So hey, hopefully you're enjoying this video because it just cost me 800 bucks. So let's fire the bug up. Spark plugs did their job. The valve adjustment did its job. I'll tell you, it did not fire up this easy yesterday when I pulled it in here, so good stuff. Well, thanks everybody for hanging out in the shop with me today and yesterday. That was a fun little project. We're probably gonna do another little video coming up soon with trying to tune that carb a little bit better, and then probably just go for some drives and have some fun. And by the way, everyone, just so you guys know, you were invited to the festivities for my 40th birthday because that's today for me. So I'm old, got to work on something even older than I am, and it was a lot of fun. All right, guys. Well, thank you all again. Till next time, God bless. Don't forget to do yourself.